a copy of this presentation as well afterwards. So I'm going to get this up here. Okay, so a lot of what we wanted to talk about, in addition to just how transportation funding works, is who's involved in transportation, because we know that's kind of half of learning an area. So we're going to talk about the stakeholders. We're going to talk about how funding works today, and then we're going to talk about some of the funding options that we think are feasible for the 2021 legislative session. So first of all, in transportation, you'll find there are a lot of groups that work on this issue because it is such a pervasive issue all around the states. First of all, there are local government groups involved, the Association of Minnesota Counties, the Rural County Caucus, the Metropolitan Inter-County Association, the League of Minnesota Cities, the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, Metro Cities, the Association of Small Cities, Township Association. Lots of groups that get involved in transportation. Also, of course, the transportation industry, which includes not only contractors, but engineering firms, suppliers, a whole host of private companies that are involved in delivering transportation projects. Whoops, let's go back. Also, of course, labor is involved in transportation. So you'll find the building trades in particular, LIUNA, the carpenters, the operating engineers, cement masons, all of those kinds of unions. Transit systems, of course, are very involved in transportation, including suburban systems, Greater Minnesota systems, and advocacy groups like Move Minnesota. And there are lots of different kinds of transportation. So we have ports, freight rail, airports, in addition to highways and bridges and transit. So it's a very interconnected system that really spans the entire state. So why is transportation important? Well, for three main things that we focus on. First of all, the economy. So our state's economy depends totally on the movement of products and people. And without that, we don't really have an economy. So the transportation system is really critical to making sure that we have a strong economy and we can have growth in our economy. Safety is another really important issue. So every year, unfortunately, hundreds of people die on our highways and thousands of people are injured. And it costs the state quite a bit of money because of these crashes. So over $1 billion a year. And we do see that a lot of the fatalities are happening in rural parts of the state, where, not surprisingly, there are a lot of two-lane roadways. Also just quality of life. People need to get around. They need access to work, to school, to healthcare, just to live their lives. And so transportation really does impact everyone every day. And in situations like we're in right now, we know people need access to grocery stores. Hopefully we will be getting people to vaccination sites. So how people move around the state is really, really important right now. Unfortunately, though, our transportation system is aging and is inadequate to meet the needs that are out there. A lot of the system was built after World War II. We have thousands of structurally deficient bridges, deteriorating roadways. We need upgrades at ports and airports. And we have a growing population that needs better transit service than we are able to provide because of the funding limitations. And we know that almost 1 million more people will move to Minnesota in the coming decades. And that means even more people trying to get around. We also know that freight traffic is growing dramatically with all the online ordering. And we're going to see a lot more truck traffic, freight traffic in the coming years. And we need roads and bridges that can handle that. Mm-hmm. So in Minnesota, we are fortunate that we have constitutionally dedicated revenue sources. So one thing you'll learn very quickly about transportation, we don't get a lot of money out of the general fund. And this year, we're not looking for money out of the general fund in particular. So unlike a lot of groups you're going to hear from, we understand that the problems with the general fund right now, and we're looking for revenue sources outside of the general fund that are dedicated to transportation. So the Minnesota Constitution dedicates the fuel tax, which is not just a gas tax, but it's also charged on diesel and other fuels. The license tab fees are the motor vehicle registration tax and the motor vehicle sales tax. So the sales tax people pay when they buy a car, that's dedicated to transportation. So it doesn't go into the general fund. In addition, there are some statutorily dedicated revenue sources, and these are also important. They're not as secure as the constitutionally dedicated revenue sources because the legislature does have the option of changing where this money goes to. But right now, the sales tax on auto repair parts, of that, 145.6 million is dedicated to the Highway Trust Fund. We think that's about 60% of the total that's collected. There are two different sales taxes on rental vehicles that are statutorily dedicated to the Highway Trust Fund. And there's the motor vehicle lease sales tax. So if you lease a car instead of buying it, you also pay sales tax. And that's also being directed to transportation. And then there's also an electric vehicle fee of $75 per year that's also going into the Highway Trust Fund, but it is not a constitutionally dedicated fee. So this is kind of what it looks like. We have this big Highway Trust Fund here. And as you can see, we have these revenue sources that go into it: the fuel tax, the tab fees, the MVEST, as it's called, and the statutorily dedicated sales taxes. And it all adds up. These are fiscal year 2020 numbers to about $2.5 billion. And then they go out. And the Constitution actually requires that of 95% of the money in this fund, 62% has to go to trunk highways, 29% to county state aid roads, and 9% to municipal state aid streets. And then right now, 5% of this whole total is going to townships for roads, bridges, and then there's a flexible account also. In addition, as you know, there's a federal fuel tax, and federal highway dollars go directly into the trunk highway fund.
Oh, okay.
So that's the basics for road and bridge funding in Minnesota. It is a little complicated, but the important thing is that we have constitutionally dedicated user fees that fund roads and bridges in Minnesota. The money is distributed not just to MnDOT, but to counties and cities and townships. So it's a really important source of funding to keep our roads and bridges safe. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily with AMC, and she's going to talk more specifically about county funding needs.
Thanks, Margaret, and good morning, everyone. As Margaret said, my name is Emily Murray. I'm the Transportation and Infrastructure Policy Analyst for the Association of Minnesota Counties. And, just a little background on AMC. We're a voluntary organization representing all of Minnesota's 87 counties, and we provide a voice for all counties at the Capitol. We've been around since 1909, so a lot of what we started doing is similar to what we're doing today, but, back then, it wasn't so easy for counties to maybe get to the Capitol and have their voice heard. So we represent them at the Capitol. We also provide some education and training for our members, county commissioners, and county staff. In addition to representing all of our counties, we also have over 20 affiliate organizations that are a part of AMC, and one of them is the Minnesota County Engineers Association. This is a group that I work really closely with, and this is a group that represents all the county engineers in the state. So hopefully you've had a chance to meet some of your county commissioners, and maybe you've even met your county engineer as well. I know that map is hard to read, but each county does have a county engineer. And if you haven't met your engineer, I would be happy to make an introduction. They really are experts on everything transportation related, specifically on the county system, and they can be a great resource to you. And so again, I'd be happy to connect you. Next slide, please. Okay, so Margaret talked a little bit about this already, but counties, we've got the county state aid system and county roads. So that two different pieces of the pie that make up what roads are under the county jurisdiction. For the county state aid highway system, like Margaret said, we get 29% of that pie, that 95% that goes from the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund. So in 2020, that equated to $674 million for county state aid highways. The roads that are considered CSAH, they're regionally significant enough to justify a state contribution. Next slide. But the CSAH roads they're about 60% of our jurisdiction. So there's about 31,000 miles of CSAH roads, and then there's about just a little under 14,000 miles of county road miles. So while the CSAH roads are eligible for that HUTDF funding we just looked at, county roads are not. They are funded with local revenues, such as the property tax levies, wheelage tax, local option sales tax, and more. Next slide. One thing that we've encountered in the last several years is that even though CSAH roads they qualify for HUTDF money, it hasn't been enough funding to maintain them. So we've also had to use local revenues to fund CSAH routes, which means that our county roads are falling even further behind. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on some of those local funding mechanisms next. Okay, so the local option sales tax, this is, one of two really great options for counties. And I'm going to give a little bit of a description here. So the sales tax was made available to counties back in 2008. Really what it is a county can have up to 0.5% sales tax on all retail sales in the county. It must be used, this is under statute, there's 4 different ways that a county can use this funding. So it's payment of the capital costs of a specific transportation project or improvement, payment of the cost, both capital and operating, of a specific transit project, payment of the capital costs of a Safe Routes to School program, and payment of transit operating costs. So just a little bit more here. So now this tax can be enacted by county board approval. I should say exactly 50 counties have the local option sales tax right now. And if you look at that map, I know it's small, but we're looking at the blue and the purple counties when we're talking about local option sales tax. So the blue counties have enacted the full 1/2 cent sales tax. The purple counties have a 1/4 cent sales tax. And, obviously there are counties right here that are in white that, don't have either one of these two options. And I'll go a little bit more in detail on what the green counties are next. But while the local option sales tax has been extremely helpful for the counties that can implement it, it doesn't make sense for every county. One thing we kind of like to say is, if you don't have a big box store in your county, you're probably not going to generate enough sales tax from this. And county boards really take that into consideration before adding another tax on their citizens. But it's been extremely helpful for those that have it. Next slide, please. Okay, so the wheelage tax. These are the counties on the map that are in green. So the wheelage tax is up to $20 per vehicle on vehicles that are housed within the county. So this is an extra line item that shows up on your tab renewal form when you get that every year. So it's collected with the tab fees. It can be used for highway purposes, for local roads, or CSAH matches. And again, this is enacted by county board approval, and we've got 53 counties that have enacted the wheelage tax right now. Originally, they could only charge $10, and then that changed in 2018. And really now they can charge anywhere from $1 to $20. So there are still counties that charge 10 or 15. A lot do charge the full 20. But you can see on the map, a lot of our counties are taking advantage of this and using it for additional funding for their local roads. And a lot of counties have both the local option sales tax and the wheelage tax. Next slide. Okay, so another funding source for counties is general obligation bonds. And of course, these can fund many modes, which we have listed there. And the legislature just passed a great bonding bill this past fall during the 5th special session, which included record investment on transportation for transportation programs specifically. I listed 4 there that counties and other locals support. And I'm going to go a little bit more into detail on the first 2 in the next slides. Okay, so the Local Road Improvement Program, this is a competitive grant program solicited or administered by state aid, but it provides funding assistance to locals, counties, cities, and townships for constructing or reconstructing local roads. So there's 3 accounts within the Local Road Improvement Program that a road might qualify for funding for, and I have those listed there. And again, it's a competitive solicitation process. For the funding that was included in this last bonding bill, the solicitation process opened in early December, and Margaret will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it ends in beginning of March. And then the Local Road Improvement Program Advisory Committee plays a part in determining which projects will be funded through that program. And again, here, I know this chart is small, but this is from the state aid website. And I just want to show you a little bit about, how many projects can get funded with this money. So like I said before, the last bonding bill had record investments. You can see there was $75 million just for the Local Road Improvement Program. Back in 2018, there was $35 million and 49 projects were funded from that. And the funding that goes to these projects, it's doesn't usually cover the entire project. There's a local match involved in that too. So next slide, please. All right, so the Local Bridge Replacement Program is another general obligation bonding program that we support. So this is a little different than the Local Road Improvement Program in that there's not a competitive solicitation process for this. Instead, they, identify structures that are eligible for rehabilitation or replacement based on condition ratings, and MnDOT maintains a master bridge priority list. But again, I just kind of want to show you on that chart. 30 million was put towards this program in the last bonding bill. And of course, they haven't necessarily, they haven't given out that funding yet for bridge projects, but in 2018, there was 5 million in the bonding bill. And there's 22 bridge projects that were funded through that program. This local bridges also received money funding through the lease motor vehicle sales tax that Margaret talked about earlier too. There's a percentage of that goes to smaller local bridges. Okay, so that's a little bit about where we get funding for county roads and other city streets and townships and whatnot. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the need now. And as I mentioned earlier, I work really closely with the Minnesota County Engineers Association. And in the fall of 2019, we County Commissioners, AMC, really asked them to identify or help identify what is the need on the county system right now. And so these next few slides were put together by engineers. So while I'm not an engineer, I'm going to do my best to describe them in my own way. So in order to look at the need, they looked at they looked at it in 2 different ways. So they looked at the Transportation Finance Advisory Council report. That's the TFAC report. And then they also looked at the county state aid needs system itself. Okay, next slide, please. So the TFAC report, this was something that was commissioned by Governor Dayton. The TFAC itself was comprised of commissioners, MnDOT staff, legislators, labor reps, manufacturing. And what they just tried to look ahead at 20 years to see what the needs are on our transportation system. And they identified 3 different scenarios. Really, the first one was a do nothing scenario. The second was just to maintain our current system. And the third was for creating a world-class system that would make us economically competitive. And the TFAC, they recommended scenario 3 for all sectors of transportation in our state. So for counties, that was an additional $18 billion over 20 years that they were suggesting was the need. So breaking that down between, that was about $900 million for each year, and then breaking that down for counties, it was $450 million for the CSAH routes and $450 for county roads as well. All right. So county engineers also looked at this based on the state aid needs system. So county engineers, county and city engineers have their own screening boards. And what they do is they look at 25-year construction needs, and the system, the needs system is a look back that considers actual average unit prices for the last 5 years. So the needs system calculates an annualized life cycle cost of the county system. So this is, and this is something that's required under statute for them to report. For 2020, the 25-year construction needs equaled over $18.7 billion. Okay, so that, you can see there's a lot of numbers on here. So that broke down to $750 million a year. And for the HUT, for our CSAH routes, that was $400 million a year. I'm sorry, but the gap of what they're not receiving from HUTF is around $350 million a year. So then for the county road system, and we're assuming here, the county road system is about, 46% of the CSAH system. It's about $8.6 billion over the 25 years with $160 million gap. So the need that they identified through the screening board system, the county state aid needs system, is around $1.1 billion, with a funding gap of about $510 million for the county system itself. And so this is just looking at counties, of course, obviously city streets have their own needs as well as township roads. So a lot of lane miles across the state, but this is just kind of highlighting a little bit of the needs on our system. So with that said, my last slide here is just to highlight our priority at AMC relating to transportation has been for the last several years, just increased transportation funding, specifically those constitutionally dedicated sources, and just to maintain, new revenue for roads, bridges, and transit. I didn't talk about transit in my presentation here, but that's obviously a big piece of the pie for the county system as well. So that's all for me. I believe Sherry is next, if I'm correct, unless there's any questions for me directly on this portion. Thank you.
Sherry, you need to unmute.
Dang. Well, at least these Zoom meetings will never go away, so I'll finally get the hang of it. All right, good morning. Sherry Munyon, and as we said earlier, I represent the Minnesota Public Transit Association. And just a quick note on who MIPTA, the Public Transit Association, is. Their mission is to advocate for public transit systems. And this is the only statewide coalition of transit systems and advocates, and they're involved in providing training events for the transit operators and hold an annual conference and a rodeo for their bus drivers to show off their skills. We speak out on behalf of transit systems and riders across the state and serve both the federal level and state level for our transit systems. We support quality alternatives for our people in communities, large, small, urban, so all across the state of Minnesota. And I'm going to start with some background information on metropolitan area transit first. Metro Transit under the Metropolitan Council, and their systems include buses, light rail, van pools. Bus service is provided in a variety of ways, and that's express bus service, which can be, for instance, from a suburban community to a downtown with very few stops to get workers to their businesses. Local buses who circulate throughout the communities, light rail, rapid transit, again offering limited stops, bus rapid transit, dial-a-ride services. There are communities who have local services who are more in the ex-urban area and don't necessarily have regular route service. These systems called TransitLink are also contracted under the Metropolitan Council. And a couple examples are the Scott County Services, SmartLink, and Anoka County Traveler. The suburban providers in the state of Minnesota were founded in 1995. There was a period of time where communities in the transit taxing district in those suburban communities, thank you, Margaret, did not receive service, but they were in the taxing district. And they went to the legislature and asked for the authorization to opt out. And they originally had created a taxing system locally, property tax base, and began their transit service. Eventually, the legislature changed that. Legislators decided to eliminate that local property tax and tie them closer to the Met Council. So they now receive their funding through the Metropolitan Council. The suburban transit providers today are Maple Grove Transit, Minnesota Valley Transit, which serves Apple Valley, Burnsville, Eagan, Lakeville, Rosemont, Savage, Shakopee, and Prior Lake. And a couple of those communities previously had their own service. So there's been collaboration and a combination of these services over the years. Plymouth Metrolink and then Southwest Transit. And Southwest Transit is providing service out in Eden Prairie, Chaska, and Chanhassen. One of the things that some of the suburban transit systems have been able to do with their small size is be a little nimble sometimes, and bringing in innovative service. Coach buses were first brought in by suburban systems to increase ridership on their commuter routes. And then Metropolitan Council has adopted that on some of their routes as well. Similar to road and bridge funding, the transit systems also have revenue from a large variety of sources. In the 7-county metro area, funding comes from federal dollars of $135 million annually, state general fund appropriation of $89 million. The MVES, motor vehicle sales tax, is $290 million a year. And suburban systems receive a percentage of the motor vehicle sales tax, currently at 3.75%. And then there's the fare box recovery, and that's another $120 million into the system. And the last one, the major one, is the metropolitan sales tax. And the revenue there is $328 million. Counties are allowed to levy that 0.5% sales tax locally, and they may use that money for both roads, bridges, and transit. So some of them do, and some of them don't. Next slide, please. Now I'll talk about Greater Minnesota Transit. We do have transit service today in all 80 counties, and that's recent in the last half a dozen years. But there's variety in how much service exists in these counties. We still have a couple counties who have very limited service in just a handful of local communities, not county-wide service like you would see in the metropolitan area. There are over 40 systems providing service, and we have in Greater Minnesota 6 tribal systems, and we have 7 urbanized systems. These are large metropolitan areas such as Rochester, Duluth, St. Cloud, etc. And then we have 5 small urban systems that serve Greater Minnesota, the lower population out there. In addition, a major component to serve the rural community is our volunteer driver systems. Today we have about 90 programs statewide, and we wouldn't be able to do the job that they're doing today to serve citizen trips without our volunteer drivers. And I'm not going to get into detail about the volunteer driver issue today, but we'll be talking to you more about that in the future. There's a problem today in retaining volunteer drivers, which means trip requests have to be turned down. I'll talk
Mary,
now.
can I interrupt? Who funds the volunteer driver programs? Because I already know what the issue is there.
The volunteer driver programs have resources. Sometimes there's federal dollars available. Other times it's local dollars available. Federal dollars can come through aging services and can come through Medicaid reimbursements. And then local communities with their resources will supplement and provide the revenue needed. There's very little actual investment because they are volunteers. Volunteers are paid a reimbursement for mileage. And to the question, the big issue that comes about for volunteer drivers is they're only paid the federal reimbursement rate without being taxed as income. So the federal charitable rate is 14 cents a mile compared to the business rate, which is 56 cents a mile. And most of the organizations who work with volunteer drivers actually pay more than 14 cents. So a volunteer is taxed on the difference between 14 cents and 40 cents or 50 cents, whatever they get.
All right, we'll work on that.
Thank you. The next slide is Greater Minnesota Transit funding. And just like in the metro area, there's a wide variety of funding sources to obtain revenues through. Federal funding is a component, again, $34 million a year. Then the general fund appropriation of $17 million a year. MVEST and leased vehicle revenue both total $73 million a year. And then the local share, and our Greater Minnesota Transit systems are required to provide a 15 to 20% local share for operations and for capital, their bus replacement programs. And communities all handle that differently. Some communities will use their tax base, whether it's a sales tax levy or a property tax levy. Some communities rely on their fare box recovery. Some communities have contracts, and the contracts can be with day activity centers and other similar options in their community. And most of them have somewhat of a combination of their local share that they match with the state dollars. And because of the wide diversity in transit systems and the wide diversity in funding sources, some of the impediments that we've seen for public transit include this complicated funding systems with many mechanisms. There are also complications in terms of governance and lacking a real unified statewide approach to increasing state transit revenues and equity throughout the state for our citizens. And then the local share issue, particularly when you take a look at tough economic times right now, are hurting, and they're having a more difficult time setting aside money for transit right now, competing with their other things that they have to meet. So as we look at things like the park and ride lots and the connections to transit, then there's some differences between local control and state control that have to be worked out. And between suburban transit and Metro Transit / Metro Council, there are always some continuing concerns about fair share for money and individual community authority. So I just lay those out there so you know that, you know, sometimes it's difficult to get everybody on the same page. We all work for that. Greater Minnesota Transit, the Minnesota Public Transit Association, has always been a part of the coalition. Not only do they need money to run their buses, but they need safe roads and bridges for the buses and their passengers to be on. So thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to Laura Ziegler.
Thanks so much, Sherry. And good morning, still morning, everyone. Laura Ziegler with Associated General Contractors. Absolute privilege to be in this space with you this morning. Sun is shining where I'm at, so really appreciate your time today. I'm just going to briefly go over who we are, why we're in this conversation, and I'll just get started here. Margaret, do you want to advance? So Associated General Contractors of Minnesota, otherwise known as AGC, we're a nonprofit professional trade association. We are dedicated to promoting opportunity and excellence in both the building and highway construction industry across the state. I have to chuckle listening to the other presentations because we're almost the baby of the family, even though we were formed in 1919 with AMC being about 110 years old and Transportation Alliance over 125. We're the baby, and we just celebrated our centennial last year. So we've been around a long time. And fun fact, we were actually the first recognized chapter of the AGC of America. So we have over 400 members statewide, and they're comprised of both highway and building sectors of the market. That includes heavy and municipal utility construction. So sometimes they're used interchangeably when we say highway and road contractors. That also includes specialty contractors. I refer to them as our horizontal members doing the horizontal work. And then, of course, we have our building contractors, vertical and commercial. Our members do not build single-family residential homes. They do get into the housing space when you're dealing with a project or development that's maybe multi-use, and there are apartments, of course, but our members do not build single-family residential homes. So getting into a little more detail, when I say highway and road contractors, they do a lot more than just roads and highways. They build bridges. They're the ones putting the sewer and water in, other utilities, parks, trails, airports, walkways, energy, solar, and our transit systems. Just to kind of give you an idea, really runs the gamut. Even though general contractors are, that's in our name, the membership includes those specialty contractors and other affiliate businesses that have interest and do work in these industries. Of course, the entire construction process includes owners, engineers, architects, those specialty trades, labor and suppliers. And this really reflects how each project is very different across the state. And also on our highway side, the industry in Minnesota still has a lot of small and local privately owned firms. So we are on, Margaret, could you go back, please? So we are on to, this is our, as I affectionately refer to, the horizontal members. So we have roughly a little over 80 highway members as part of our association. The majority of AGC's membership on both sides, highway and building, choose to be signatory to the unions. So those labor unions that Margaret mentioned earlier, LIUNA, 49ers, carpenters, etc., over 80% of our members choose to sign to those unions. You'll see from the map, we have firms across the state. Those companies that are non-union are pretty exclusively non-metro companies. And I also wanted to mention, of course, for today's conversation, we're fairly focused on the Department of Transportation and delivering their program. That is what our members do. But these are the other state agencies that we work very closely with, and just demonstrates how it really runs the gamut here with labor and industry, the Department of Administration, that's more on the building side. The Office of Pipeline Safety, we work with quite a bit when it comes to worker safety and utilities. That's something you will definitely hear from us more about. The Office of Human Rights, they do workforce certificates and equal pay certificate and compliance, along with workforce goals. So we interact with them, and as well as deed programming, and then of course the PUC. So why are we here today? Well, of course, representing the private industry, you know, yes, there's an interest there, but it goes very, very deep. In terms of safety, we're talking about the needs of the state and regions and communities, and investing in infrastructure, but then also stability in the market. As we know, so many industries have experienced instability over the last year. And when it comes to funding transportation in particular, it does take time to ramp up programs and plan for them. I can see Senator Johnson nodding her head with free construction, engineering, and the like, in determining community needs. And so as part of having a stable long-term funding package, that also helps, obviously, on the private side in planning for workforce and labor and recruitment, and having folks to have jobs to go to. And you will often hear me talk on the workforce side. We talk about jobs a lot and investing in jobs and job creation. But when it comes to construction, we're talking about careers and sustaining good wage jobs. And that's really important in terms of the conversation. These are not just jobs, they are careers for people. And one item I wanted to leave you with today, very exciting for us in the last year, our national association, they came together with the University of Colorado, and they were able to develop an economic model, and it's referred to as a construction impact model. So when we're having bonding bill conversations, or you're having conversations about how many jobs would this actually create, what would be the impact of such investment? And we're able to utilize this calculator to figure that out now, and have a really good econometric model to look at. So what I did is I took the $300 million investment in transportation that was from the bonding bill. And we know from that model that that's going to create almost 4,000 jobs. But of course, when you invest, you're almost getting a 2-to-1 return on investment because your output and your total economic impact is almost $600 million. And that includes, and that's around all types of construction activities. These are only in-state jobs, but they include direct, indirect, supplier, and then those induced spending jobs as well. But certainly I could plug any number in and get numbers for you. So I just wanted to mention that here for you today, because even if you don't sit on the transportation committee, you obviously are going to sit on another committee that intersects with transportation, and knowing that coming out of the current economic situation that we are in and economic recovery, infrastructure is a critical component of that. And so I mentioned that here today, and I can certainly run other numbers if that's of interest to people in the future. So I will round out my comments by just thanking you again for your time. Typically, we would be coming to you at the Capitol, so I included a little photo for you today, 2 photos. 2 years ago, we were able to bring one of the concrete trucks to the Capitol for our day on the Hill and to meet with legislators. And then a couple years ago, we were also successful in getting some work zone safety legislation. So as that gets talked about in terms of broader transportation funding and safety, that remains a top priority for our contractors and their workforce. Thank you. And I believe Margaret has some closing comments.
Yeah, so we just wanted to wrap up with, okay, so how do we get more investment in transportation? As you just heard, it's really important for job creation and to help get out of this mess from the pandemic. So we have lots of ideas for how to do that. And of course, one of the things you hear a lot about is the fuel tax, because it's kind of the workhorse of how we pay for roads and bridges in particular. It can only be used for roads and bridges. So the gas tax is not used for transit. It's not used for any other government purpose. It can only be used to fix roads and bridges. And we think that that should be increased. It has not been increased for quite a while. Currently, our fuel tax is 28.5 cents a gallon. That compares to the US average of 36.38 cents a gallon. So Minnesota is a low tax state when it comes to the fuel tax. We also think that the license tab fee should be adjusted. One easy way to do that is to change the depreciation schedule, or how gradually the vehicle value that you see charged for those license tab fees is calculated. We think that the metro area sales tax should be bumped up for transit investment in the metro area. The motor vehicle sales tax rate is kind of a strange anomaly. It's 6.5%, but the general sales tax in Minnesota is 6.875%. So we think that those should be equalized so that they're the same. Also, the annual electric vehicle fee is now $75 a year. We know that electric vehicles are going to take off and become more and more what people are buying, but they don't pay the gas tax, obviously. So we want to make sure that that electric vehicle fee compensates for the fact that those car owners won't be paying the gas tax. And then we think looking at companies like Uber and Lyft, a number of states have a fee on rides through those companies that is dedicated to transit. In addition to those funding options, we want the legislature to look at how dollars are spent to make sure that they're really being spent most efficiently. And because our Minnesota Constitution requires that dedicated funds be used for transportation purposes, We want to make sure that that really is happening and that money isn't being diverted to other purposes. And sometimes we see questionable expenditures of highway dollars in particular, like paying state sales tax is something that we don't think should be done with constitutionally dedicated dollars. So those are some ideas along those lines. And then there are local options. So local governments do have some tools, as you heard about from Emily, but there are other tools that they're looking for. Specifically, cities would like the authority to create street improvement districts. We also think that the transit taxing district should be expanded in the metropolitan area. And we think that with increased funding into the Trunk Highway Fund, that the local cost participation policy should be looked at, because we know it's really a burden right now for local governments to come up with their share of transportation projects. And especially if it's a state highway, it's really hard for local governments to contribute funds to those state highway projects. So that's kind of it. I know that's a lot of information. We're available to you as a resource. That's a lot of what we wanted to get across to you today. And we want to work with you on legislation to increase funding in a sustainable way, dedicated funding. There will be bills introduced that probably encompass a number of the funding mechanisms that you heard about today. So we hope that you'll be supportive. If you have questions, we really want to hear from you. And we will definitely provide this presentation and any and other information that you're looking for. So I just wanted to ask if anybody wants to ask a question. We do have a few minutes. And if you want to use the chat box, you can certainly do that. And yes, we will send the presentation out to all of you after this is done.
Margaret, I was, oh, Jen has a question. Go ahead. Oh, you don't have a question? I was
just saying thank you.
Oh, I was counseled by Senator Newman to make sure that I let other people ask questions. Okay, quick question. Is Highway Safety Improvement Project money, is that state money or is that federal money? HSIP money?
A lot of that, yeah, a lot of that
federal?
Yeah.
Okay, I asked about Highway Safety Improvement Project money, Jen. That's money that county engineers can use specifically for safety improvements. And then this morning I was in a meeting and I was surprised Ron Elkins mentioned he's going to be introducing legislation to allow cities to implement a gas tax. What do you know about that? And is that something that I should attach my name to? Is it reasonable to think it's going to pass?
It is an option. Not very many states allow a local option gas tax. Some do. As some counties do have their own separate fuel tax on top of the state and federal fuel tax. It's certainly an option. I would say we have not heard a lot from counties and cities that this is something that they're clamoring for. I think cities are more interested in the street improvement districts and maybe a local option sales tax like the counties have, but cities don't have. But certainly we are open to any and all funding possibilities. I just have not heard a lot, especially in recent years, about that particular option.
So a street improvement project or district, is that kind of like, then there's a surcharge on those businesses, or how does that work? What is that?
Right, it's a fee that's charged on property owners based on some kind of calculation of traffic that serves that property. So the idea is right now there are certain institutions, nonprofits that don't pay property tax, but certainly they generate traffic, and the streets in front of those institutions need to be fixed and plowed and all of that. So this is a way to try to get at, you know, how do we get their fair share of the cost to maintain those streets in front of their whether it's a university or a nonprofit or, you know, those kinds
That's
of.
a great idea. You know,
And it's voluntary.
oh, it's voluntary?
Well, it would be up to the city. So
Oh,
it wouldn't be
okay.
the state.
Not up to the university.
It would be the state allowing cities if they want to do it, and not all cities want to do it. But if a city wants to do it, then they would be able to do it.
Oh, I think that's a great idea. Eric, did you come in to ask a question and I'm taking all the time?
No, I just got here.
Oh, I have another question then really quick. So we evaluated all of the streets at the University of Minnesota. They own a lot of their streets, don't they? Or are those actually city streets?
That I don't know offhand.
Well, Margaret, I think that's a great idea and I would love to work with you on that. I think that's a very good idea. We have so many colleges in the metro area even that I think that could be make a big difference.
Right. Yep. Okay, does anyone else want to jump in, ask a question, make a comment?
Sherry, Lisa already talked to me about that, helping to subsidize the volunteer driver program. So I would like to talk to you about that and maybe we have some idea, maybe we can generate some ideas for where to find. Lisa described it to me differently. So I don't know if it's a question of funding or regulation, because it sounds like a tax issue.
There is a tax issue and a policy issue, so I'd be happy to follow up and walk you through that.
And so like I told Margaret, I don't really understand mechanisms. So that's where I need help from you guys, is understanding like how to navigate fixing a problem like that.
I'll follow up right away.
Okay, well, I have a meeting at noon, so follow up. This is just crazy how many meetings they put us in. I can't believe it, but I suppose that's why we make so much money, right, Eric? You guys, Eric's awesome. He's a friend of mine. He's on the faculty at oh my God, I almost said St. Ben's. That is right?
It's both of them.
St. Ben, St. John's.
Mm-hmm.
Who probably don't pay any maintenance fees for their street.
Or property taxes.
That's right. We got to get after them. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. And like I said, we'll be happy to provide this presentation and any information you need. We just really look forward to working with you, whether it's through the budget for transportation or through a bonding bill. We really hope that you will help us to make the investments that we really need to improve safety and improve the transportation infrastructure that everybody in the state needs.
So Eric, I'll catch you
So
up
thank
if
you
you're
again.
interested in this.
Yeah.
Just telling you. Okay.
Have you guys been doing this for a while? I thought it was supposed to start at noon.
No, it started at 11.
Oh, no.
That's okay. We
That's
recorded
okay,
it.
Eric. I'll go through it with
Send you a
you.
link to that.
I'll just ask Ann and she'll tell me everything.
I will. I'll go through it with you. Okay. I'll see you guys later.
I
Okay,
am
thank
so
you.
sorry. It's in my schedule for noon. I apologize that, I mean, I can even show you. It's in my calendar. It says noon.
Oh,
You guys,
So-
Eric is trustworthy. He really did screw up. So I'll get to catch him.
So
Bye,
I apologize.
guys.
I'll talk to Ann and catch up. Thank you again, and I apologize.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great
Thank you.
Okay, bye.